Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Right of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday, and it is, I hope for your sake, you are warm, safe, dry. I know it has been just a horrific weekend for a lot of the country, so our thoughts go out to anybody and everyone that has been affected by the weather. So again, thoughts out to you all and your families if indeed you are being affected. Hard to believe, Wes. T-minus 1 week, Las Vegas.
I know it.
Boom! It's here. It's the countdown is on.
I'm pumped. It's gonna be great. My team is ready to go. It's gonna be fun, and it's cool too because it's really the kickoff of like events for at least me personally. So I get double excited. You know, the Christmas break and all that was great, but it's like I'm ready to go, and so this is gonna be awesome.
Yeah, well, and just for those out there that might be on the fence or registered and we're hoping to get into your session, Wes, we were able to, get your specific session Tuesday at 5 into a bigger room, which is now, I didn't tell you this, but went from 50, you're right around 100 already. And
oh, sweet.
My sense is it'll just like
sweet
Kelvin's session and the others, just absolutely packed. So 2 feet of snow. Wow, man. I hope you guys are okay.
Oh.
So let's get on into it for a little banter today before we introduce VJ, Wes, and VJ before we formally introduce you. I'd love to just share something for those out there that have clients and or know folks that are running FortiGate, Fortinet. The most recent the most recent patch for their FortiGate SSO continues. Even though it was patched, it is still exploitable. This came out just the other day. BJ, turning to you first, as somebody that has been in incident response literally their entire career, does threat hunting on the regular. Let's just start off with, what is it about these firewalls and VPNs that just have all threat actors giddy, continuing to just hammer on this code? Is it just that it's old code, it's easy to exploit? Give us your take on it.
Feel the boom. Be part of the conversation at Right of Boom 2026. Tickets on sale now. Use code CyberCallPod to save $100.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things, right? So one is, I'm sure they're running a code base that is really old. I think so. That is, a big reason why they continue to get exploited. Probably over 20 years, right? And so for them to kind of change their entire stack is a bit of a challenge, right? I think the other thing is that even though just in terms of volume, we see identity-based attacks kind of be the crux of the situation,
Sure.
just based on counts, I'd say the impact is a lot more immediate and felt when it's a firewall that's being compromised, right? Because the threat actors now have access to your network. They can do a lot more versus just having access to a single identity. So I think sort of, bang for the buck in terms of what they are able to do once they do get access. I think it's a lot more with a firewall compromise than them targeting identities, right? So for that reason, I would say I can see why it is a good target. I'd say from all of the investigations I've done the last 2 years, the single most, the one incident that stands out for me is the one where FortiGate was exploited. And this was not this most recent one. This was from a year and a half ago. The bad guys were able to get in, pivot from kind of getting an account on FortiGate to basically getting to a point where they'd started the recon and began the exfil. They had not deployed their ransomware. But that level of ability is really what these FortiGate exploits kind of get them, right? Yeah. And so it's much more easier for them to make money when they're able to get access to the network versus just compromising identities.
Yeah, fair. Do you think, every year we get to have Phil Langlois from the Verizon data breach report on, and where do you think, will we see vulnerabilities and identity neck and neck this year? Or do you think we'll still see identity?
I'd say just in terms of pure volume, I think identity is still the weak spot, right? Just if you're just counting numbers, right? So if I look back at sort of the investigations we did that targeted identities, for the most part, the threat actor would get access and they'd leverage that foothold to send more phishing emails. And that was the scale of it, right? Yeah. Response from that standpoint was just, let's just reset the password and revoke the session. And that was the end of it. Whereas having to respond when someone does get a foothold into the network is a lot more challenging, right? So I think pure numbers wise, it's still going to be identity attacks. But I think in terms of, what is the impact? I think if they do get a foothold onto machines or onto the network, it's felt more immediately.
Yeah. Wes, over to you. I brought you on here, A, because you're awesome, but B, this is kind of threat hunting. This is the days of purge and
dusting off the old boots.
Yeah, we didn't, in the 2016 when we met, this isn't what we saw a lot of. What are your thoughts on this? And is this going to be, we talk about this a lot, but is it going to be, hey, look, you're already seeing firewall vendors sunset this technology going to ZTNA or some type of, better technology. What are your predictions here on this?
Well, I was thinking when you asked the question of VJ, what are we going to see with identity and vulnerability? And it's sort of like, it's almost like identity is always going to be a pervasive issue because of the human element that's always involved. But vulnerabilities, it's almost like looking at weather patterns, right? Like there are just sometimes we're going to see these overwhelming waves, a lot of like what we're going to talk about today, that are for certain vendors should have been something they could have dealt with, but for the rest of us is inevitable, right? And so you see these hurricanes coming on the horizon, so to speak. And I do think that affects, this uptick in vulnerabilities and our pervasive, continuous, pesky challenges to continue to deal with it. So VJ, I kind of like what you said, and I think you're right on the money.
Yeah.
Thanks. Wes, I like your purple theme. Is that from your time at Purge?
That's a carryover, sure. Yeah, I've always loved purple. It's a sign of it's a color of royalty, and I don't know. Purple's a great color. I'm one of those weird guys. Like in kindergarten, I was afraid to tell everyone I like purple. I'm like, I like green.
It definitely suits you.
Thanks.
So jumping over to Phyllis. Speaking of royalty, Phyllis, your session, by the way, real quick at Right at Boom is real late, but packed already.
Oh, good.
Friday, it's getting packed. But for you, when you look at this through, the secure code stuff from CIS's perspective, what we're hoping vendors start to take responsibility for. What are your thoughts around it?
Well, first, a couple of things. I mean, I read earlier that, really, it's number one, it also is a secure configuration issue, right? So out of factory, if you don't allow the admin access with single sign-on, I think it's, you may not be subject to this vulnerability. So number one, Verizon Data Breach Report every year says the number one thing you can do is have a secure configuration.
Right.
Now, step two of that is measuring drift. They did say the out of factory configuration is in the more secure one. And so then you have to decide when you do turn that off, what are the impacts? But also it is that secure by design. Thanks for that, Andrew. We did create that paper, Secure by Design. Organizations that create code can measure themselves against it. And in particular, we use the SSDF, the NIST SSDF, Secure Software Design framework, as kind of like the overarching guide. And one of the things in there for sure is the way you can tell if an organization develops secure code is, number one, do they have a patch cycle and the testing of their patches and, monitoring that over time. And so, as Andrew in the group is saying, like, you see these patterns occurring over time. And so when is it that consumers kind of create that demand cycle, that demand signal of, you really do need to create secure code. Like when you release a patch, you must test it properly. Like what happened? And, what we have been seeing, barring this administration, though, and prior administrations with executive orders and national cybersecurity strategy is, the executive office wants to put more and more pressure on software vendors to create secure software. That's where SBOM requirement is coming from. That's where the Secure by Design pledge came from through CISA. The CRA, Resilience Act over in the EU, is also asking for the same thing. So it really is this demand signal that, which I'm happy for. Like, why is it that end organizations have to make sure that their software is secure?
I remember, Phyllis, all those years ago when I think it was Director Easterly put out this notice of like, we want to push upwards liability to the larger vendors. And, I threw this question in chat, but just off the cuff question for you, Phyllis, I'm curious, do you think at what point do we start to see at the national level, and I don't mean just the US, but all over, some degree of failure of secure coding and secure configuration by design negligence? At what point do we start to use that word?
Yeah, that will be very interesting. The executive office was leaning towards that way. Now, of course, big software vendors have big bucks to go and lobby. and that has happened time and time again. But what you'll see over in the EU with the CRA, they really are coming down hard on that. So it'll be interesting to observe the EU and what kind of teeth the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, has, because all those vendors are international vendors. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And in this case, the EU really is leading the charge right now. So I think that it looks like it's coming. It'll be interesting to see how long. Over the weekend, OMB kind of, loosened the requirement for the federal government had a requirement for software vendors to fill out a self-attestation form on Secure by Design. I mean, it wasn't like all the requirements in the SSDF, but they have since lifted that and made it voluntary. So you see on the US side, it's kind of like easing up a bit. So we're going to have to, we'll monitor that and see what happens.
Yeah, Andrew, I was just going to add, I think going back to what you said, I think talking about sort of the issues with FortiGate specifically and sort of firewalls, I think companies are going to want to kind of work around it with ZTNA and those technologies, right? So it's no longer an issue, right? I feel like it's just going to be, I think modern tech stacks by design are a lot more secure than some of the old ones. And so I think we're going to move to a world where people are going to adopt that versus still retaining those old technologies, right?
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. We just shameless plug. We're going to have Jason Garbus do a main stage at Write a Boom, the author of Zero Trust, and he's doing a workshop. I highly encourage you guys, if you are coming to listen to Jason, he's incredible in terms of his knowledge. BJ, let's get to you. So thrilled to have you as a first timer here on the Cyber Call. Tell a little bit about your background. Love the story of Mandiant and what you're doing today. And then I'll turn it to Wes for questions.
Firstly, Andrew, I love what you're doing with everything around the MSP world and Write a Boom. Looking forward to the conference. I'll be there as well. And thank you for hosting it in Las Vegas versus the Northeast or in the South. I could definitely do with some warmth. So yes, my name is Vijay Akasapu. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Silerian. Prior to starting Silerian, I was one of the founding employees at Mandiant. And then even before then, I worked at a company called Foundstone, which is sort of the OG consulting companies back in the day. Started by a guy by name George Kurtz, who then went on to found CrowdStrike. I was peers with Kevin at Foundstone, and when he started Redcliffe back in the day, Redcliffe Consulting, very few people know that, but prior to Mandiant becoming known, it was Redcliffe Consulting, right? He called on me to essentially start proactive services for them. And then, this was back in the time when forensics was sort of traditionally done, right? You'd have to dedupe, take in drives, do a duplication of the drives, and do like traditional forensics. And then back then, it was just around when we saw some of the Russian threat actors start to pivot to dropping their malware or exploiting these web server vulnerabilities and then kind of scaling out from there. And so there was a need for scaling out our investigative practice as well, right? We could not rely on just doing dead drive forensics. We needed a technology that allowed us to scale out our IR, right? And I'd say that is what really led to EDR as a space. Back then, there was no such thing as EDR. The technology we built to help with investigations is what kind of led to EDR, right? Fast forward a few years, started Cydian. I saw a gap in the market in terms of big companies and the way IR worked for them versus the small companies, and we kind of started our company to fill that gap. And so here I am.
Very cool. Hearing great things about you through the MSPs and the channel. So thanks again for joining us, Vijay.
Appreciate it.
Wes, over to you, pal.
Yeah, this, like we said, this is a fun discussion. I get to dust off the old boots, so to speak. I'm definitely not in this world as much as I used to be, and so I think maybe a good place, Vijay, to get started would be is get us on track, and even me personally on track with the React to Shell blog. Because I think I know it's about that, but I think it's an underlying layer that's about that as well, right? It's not just the 0 day, but as you guys were starting to dig deeper, you found more. And I think there's some latent things that we'll probably talk about based on those discoveries. So get us on track with what the React to Shell blog is and why it's relevant for MSPs.
Yeah, let me set the stage a little bit, right? So React obviously is sort of, underpins a lot of the modern tech stacks, right? It is the primary front end to a lot of companies, including ours for that matter. And so we use it for all of our front end code, right? So back in, I think it was November 30th, a component so typically the way React works is you're shipping out your binary, in this case, JavaScript code to your clients. The clients run it in the context of the browser to kind of visualize stuff, right? For certain reasons, right, efficiency gains, performance reasons, there might be a need to kind of build out that code on the back end using what they call React server components. Which essentially takes in requests from the client, does some chunking of it, some deserialization of that code or that request, and then creates the actual visual component on the back end and then serves it back to the user, right? And so, from a technology standpoint, I don't think it's that big an issue, right? We've seen vulnerabilities be, we've seen software like that be vulnerable to such exploits, right? But anyway, on the 30th of November, I believe, there was a disclosure to Facebook or Meta, where someone found a vulnerability and then disclosed it privately to Meta. There was a patch released on the 3rd of December. And then within 24 hours of that patch, we started seeing scans, right? On the 4th, which was the day after the patch was released, AWS released a blog where they talked about certain sort of Chinese-based threat actors, some IOCs and indicators of compromise related to some Chinese threat actors, right? And so we took that information, and just the way we work is we have sensors from around the world in over 20 countries that is capturing data in real time. And so we're able to kind of leverage that visibility to understanding what is happening, right? What is happening across the world. And so in this case, what we did was we're like, okay, there's some new IOCs. There's a new 0 day that's released. Let's see what we can find with it, right? So we went around sort of conducting a hunt, and our platform essentially allows us to kind of do like real time querying and searching of based on our large data lake. And what we found was interesting, and I wouldn't say it was surprising. I think that is to be expected, right? The main thing was, we started off with a hunt that allowed us to kind of take in the IOCs. In this case, there were 4 or 5 different IP addresses. And what we found was that, and this sort of harks back to how we used to do pen testing, right? What we found was that the threat actors, in this case, these Chinese threat actors, kind of leverage anonymization networks, right? They were behind Cloudflare in some cases, behind some other VPNs in other cases. But rather than just hunting for stuff like a sniper would, right, where they're kind of sending one single exploit to figuring out if that entity was vulnerable. They would not only use that, but they would also go back to using exploits from 2013 onwards, right? Because it worked, right? Because it generally works, right? They essentially kind of combined the one exploit for React Shell with vulnerabilities from Confluence, from PHP and Python, and would send 4 or 5 different exploits from their own networks, right? And that is essentially what we were seeing. So it was no longer that, and that's essentially how we used to do pen testing, right? So and the kind of going back 20 years, right? The way we would do pen testing is we figure out, once we got access to the network, what was the single most exploit or the exploit that was guaranteed to give us access, and we would use that everywhere, right? Rather than coming in and deploying a tool like a Tenable or a Nessus where you're scanning, you would find those 5 or 6 different vulnerabilities and try to exploit those, right? And that's what we're seeing the bad guys do, just across scale, right? Across the internet.
Well, and I think the one question I want to ask, because I think the audience might be wondering this too, is like, well, Big VJ, you're talking 2013 era to 2018 era vulnerabilities that they're chaining inside of it. What happened to those? Were they just not addressed? Like, give us some feedback there of why the chaining was successful of old vulnerabilities, or old exploits.
Yeah, mainly because they work, right? They still, I think the focus has to switch for the MSPs, right? I'd say for the most part, mainly because it works, right? People no longer go back 20 years to find out, try to fix stuff, right? Firstly, vendors are no longer issuing patches for software that is that old. And so they don't even have the ability to patch it, right? If they need to. And then secondly, those things still work. And as long as it continues to work from the threat actor standpoint, they're going to continue to leverage that, right? So I would say, I think it is sort of serves in the interest of the MSP to sunset technologies that it's kind of harking back to our FortiGate firewall, right? To just sunsetting technologies that cannot be patched, right?
PJ, go, Phil.
And I was just about to ask, how many people are using older versions of software when you should be really updating your software regularly? I mean, if it's no longer supported with patches, I think that's like a number one indicator that you've got to move off of it. The end of life has got to go.
I've seen companies still use Windows XP, right? And so, and sometimes, their kind of hands are tied as well, right? But yeah, it's definitely true.
And in those instances, right, VJ, you got to do some type of mitigating controls because it's a manufacturing environment, and for whatever reason, they can't upgrade the plant to $10 million of the newest, latest, greatest. But my question to you is, whether it's a Log4j, a React, to Shell, as MSPs, obviously we have a lot going on, right? To say the least. Is there any, cheat code or, hack, hate to be so cliche, but let me just use it for a second, VJ, where we can do a better job of keeping up with the libraries and things that really could matter to us that, impact us day in and day out, that, we're not necessarily we're focused more in typically on what's the CVEs, misconfigurations, and all those right things. But these libraries can have massive implications. Can they not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think CIS does a great job of making that obvious and conveying that information. But I think from an MSP standpoint, I think the bright side of this is if you actually look at the payload that was leveraged by the threat actors, like the detection angle was no different from anything else, right? If they are able to leverage or find something that is vulnerable, the techniques that they use in order to gain that foothold are no different from how it was 10, 15 years ago, right? They'd still use tools like curl to download their secondary payload or deploy a shell or whatever that is, right? So from a detection standpoint, I'd say things that stayed the same. I'm talking about this specific issue, right? Vulnerable software, vulnerable web servers, just to broaden that a bit, right? Whether it was Log4j or Confluence or React to Shell, the detection has not changed one bit, right? The IOCs are brittle. The indicators might change, the domains and hashes and IPs may change, but fundamentally the way you detect them has not really changed, right? You would keep track of what your web server is running, and if it runs anything that is anomalous, now if there's a child process that is anomalous, that is something that you'd want to look into, right?
Okay.
And so from that standpoint, at least I'm coming to it from sort of now prior to starting Silurian and prior to joining Mandiant at Foundstone, I did a lot of pen testing. So I kind of I come from sort of both sides, right? Defense as well as incident response and kind of pen testing. So for me, the underlying techniques have not really changed over several years. The tech stacks have changed, but like once they do get a foothold and how they operate, things have kind of remained static, right? So that way, I think MSPs are, as long as they have the right detection technology, they are well served. But to your point, I would say, I think the best thing they can do is kind of stay abreast of, research that CIS puts out. They'd want to understand what their stack is. They'd want to make sure that they have the visibility to be able to understand if there is something being exploited. I think that would be critical.
So I have a question. This is this is really a use case for SBOM. So I'm curious, how effective are SBOMs? Like, meaning how many organizations actually have SBOMs? How many organizations have software that can read SBOMs? And then how many organizations like have this also the inputs that's supposed to red light, like, oh, you do have this library, like a log4j or something like that. So that's just a question for the group. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious. How
I would say, just based on sort of my experience, I'd say unlikely anybody's using any of that. Right. I think we're still kind of struggling with just asset inventory, like basic asset inventory. Mm-hmm. And to take that and kind of say, let's try to get this SBOM working is a stretch for a lot of companies, right? Surprisingly. And so I think that's always going to exist. You're going to come across situations and enterprises that are going to be vulnerable to, software from 2013 or exploits from 2013. But I think that's just how things are, right?
It makes me, this is a fun conversation. It makes me realize how some things change and yet some things don't change, right? And this idea of like, as we step up that TTP pyramid of pain and we start to get into those tactics, we start to recognize, wait, some things like you mentioned, if I see some strange curl, curl's not evil by itself, but I should understand the context by which it's being used, or PowerShell outbound, or all of these kinds of things. Like, to some degree, it should feel like a safety net, assuming that I'm doing the right things to be able to see and have the capacity to deal with all of the noise that might come with that, right? And I just think that probably a big lesson learned for MSPs listening, even early into the call today, is that risk is not linear, right? In the sense of like, oh, I've progressed into 2026 era, so I don't have to worry about anything behind me. It doesn't work that way. And so I think that's just a big lesson learned, I think, for all of us today. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like more and more people are, they're looking at the shiny object, right, which is the latest 0-day in this case. It was React to Shell, but they kind of lose sight of the fact that old stuff still works, right? So let's not just focus on sort of the shiny object right in front, right? Let's make sure you're dealing with, and to your point, right, risk is not linear. Let's make sure we're dealing with the risk at large. And so that means, assessing, start from the basics, right? What do your assets look like? What are you actually running? And then start from there, right? Know what software you have, what your exposure is to the internet, who are your assets, who are you trying to protect, and just start from the basics first before you kind of look for the shiny object, right? And try to kind of resolve that. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of mentioned in just looking globally at all of the internet traffic and all the things that are happening just across the board, starting to piece all this together and recognize this chaining of attacks and this usage of, yes, new things, but also very old things together. Any indication or insight into like, is there sophisticated threat actor collaboration going on behind the scenes here? Or is this just like a one-off kind of thing? Like, give us some feedback of like behind the scenes, what you think may be going on.
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of looking back at my days at Mandiant. We responded to incidents where we saw very sophisticated threat actors kind of, try to gain access to dealing with some of the Russian actors that were more opportunistic. I would say, I think the likelihood of just companies in general being targeted by sophisticated attackers is very minute, right? I'd say 99.9% of the attacks we see are opportunistic, right? The sophistication that has matured of the threat actors for sure, right? Even though they're not sponsored by a state, You're still seeing sophisticated attackers kind of be able to take in a patch and kind of make that something that's workable. And I think that is just going to improve over time, right? Especially with LLMs and everything that's going on there, right? For anybody to take a vulnerability or a patch and then make that exploitable is going to just get better. But we're not seeing threat actors kind of collaborate across sophistication, right? We're not seeing the Chinese sort of state-backed actor work with the more sort of spray and pray kind of actors, right? That I don't think we're seeing. But the caveat is, right, I can only sort of give our perspective as given where our sensors are and where our visibilities, right? If you spoke with the Mandiant, for example, that is kind of more dealing with the Chinese state actor, they might have a different perspective because of who they see, right? If you talk to a Huntress, they might have a different perspective, right? It's really the audience and where your sensors are and who you're trying to protect is what is going to kind of determine what your perspective is. So we don't see as much state-backed actors. We do see a lot of financial actors, a lot of opportunistic actors, not so much the sophisticated, APT3 type actors that are building out exploits just for the sole purpose of compromising a single entity. That is not something we see, right? Just to address your question.
So that kind of segues into my last question before I want Phyllis to ask in chat as well is, you guys had a really great blog article that I read this weekend. And I've seen a lot of stuff on LinkedIn and other places. If y'all aren't reading what VJ and team are producing, you should. One of the things you were talking about, the blog article, is bring your own runtime attack. And you were kind of speaking through a little bit of again, old things just never die, right? This idea of starting with a phone call and a really nice person and, probably great language and no strange accent, right? And things begin from there, right? And, MSPs, we're notorious for, maybe overly trusting in our tools. And I've got the latest tech stack and the coolest thing, and everyone on Reddit is blessed what I'm using. And so I know I'm good, right? And yet we still kind of bypass all of that. What's the uncomfortable lesson that we should be learning from this?
For me, that was an interesting one, right? So again, just to set the stage. So the way we work is, for just given my experience, right? For me, I'm a big believer in enterprise visibility, right? The fuller the visibility, the better your ability to detect stuff. So in this case, what had happened was there was an entity where one of the accounting persons got a call, got off Teams chat, right? And in this case, the threat actor basically spoofed the first name and last name of an internal IT person. And they sent team requests to 7 or 8 different internal employees, right? The one thing we found, I think that was surprising to me, was, so we take in telemetry from Microsoft in order to detect stuff like this. What we found was the gap between when the threat actor actually initiated the Teams session and when Microsoft makes that telemetry available is wide, right? So there's like a 3-hour difference between them actually initiating the call and us getting the telemetry. So there's a gap there, right, that Microsoft has to address, that they have to make sure that people that are in the business of trying to protect companies have that telemetry in real time, because timing is of essence, right? And then there are lots of other things that they can do to prevent that from happening, right? In this case, the bad guy used a domain that is not that of a client, right? They spoofed a domain, or they had access to a different domain. They used that domain to connect to Teams and then spoofed an internal user to initiate that Teams chat, right? The end user, when they get a request, that domain should be obvious to them, right? Why would you hide the domain? So me as an end user, if I'm getting a call or a chat request from an internal IT person, I can straight away say it is, okay, it's not my company's employee, because the domain is not matched, right? So there are some things that Microsoft should improve on, and definitely should do that. But what they did was they initiated call, had the employee basically connect to Quick Assist, and essentially downloaded Dino, which is sort of a node equivalent, runtime environment or runtime tool. And nothing in what they did was malicious, right? Nothing, if you send all of the hashes to VirusTotal, nothing would stand out, right? In this particular case, they had, I'll name it, right? CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike did not detect a thing, right? Because everything is fine. It's all legit tools. What really stood out was that this was an accounting person, a bookkeeping person that was now downloading some developer code, and that stood out, right? And so I think from my standpoint, what is key to kind of detection is having enterprise visibility across the board, right? On your endpoints, on your network, your cloud services, and be able to stitch together a story based on what we're observing, right? And so, and just to kind of take this further, it stood out because it was a development runtime that was, that the accountant downloaded and ran. But I think with the advent of sort of AI agents and everybody using AI agents, including agents that run on your desktop, you're going to expect everybody to want to use AI agents. So now if the bad guy kind of pivoted to, rather than using Dino, using an AI agent, that I don't think it would not have stood out, right, as from an analytics standpoint, because you're expecting people to download, AI agents and to run that on your desktops, right? So I think it's just a matter of time before that happens, where even for a company that has that visibility, that level of visibility, for us to kind of distinguish intent, is it a user that downloaded an AI agent because they want to gain the efficiency gain from it, or is it a bad guy that had them download an AI agent and is now going to kind of leverage that? It's going to be hard to say, right? Unless we have sort of better telemetry from within the agents themselves, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah, and so I think that's the future is going to be interesting, especially with sort of what we're seeing with the AI agents and sort of the ability. Just over the weekend, I kind of read up about this new tool called CloudBot. I don't know if you guys are following that. It's basically an agent that you run on your desktop that people are now just running on their main machines that give the agent access to everything, your email, your files, and all of your services. And so if you start to see the bad guys kind of leverage similar functionality, it's going to be a challenge for us, right, from a detection standpoint.
All right. Thanks. So, you've already covered that. Hey, they basically, used legitimate tools, so it wouldn't be caught by EDR. So MSPs listening are saying, okay, so it's not going to be caught by my EDR. So what should I be doing instead? If I can't rely on my EDR, then what is it that an MSP should be doing in order to detect this kind of attack?
Yeah, I think it sort of kind of harks back to, so from a threat actor standpoint, it is, there's a sequence of events, right? There is a full life cycle to what they do. There's a full attack life cycle, right? And I think that kind of goes back to detection as well, right? From a detection standpoint, you want to make sure you have the ability to not just detect and respond to sort of different stages of the attack life cycle, but also prevent bad things from happening across different stages of the attack life cycle, right? So you'd want to know, you'd want to have established, I think just kind of going back to the basics, right? You'd want to have established processes. You'd want to know what your assets look like, what is the exposure. You'd want to have that full enterprise visibility, right? So understanding who's doing what. And so, yes, I mean, EDRs, if they're focused on detecting bad stuff, will miss it. But if you have that full context, I think kind of gives you a better ability to detect bad stuff from happening, right? If in this case, if the bad actors kind of pivot to, rather than using Dino, which is a development-related tool, but if they pivoted to an AI agent, is it a legitimate AI agent, right? Is it an improved AI agent? Like all of that is visibility that you want to have. And you can only gain that from making sure you have that full sort of access, right?
Right. So it really is like, you really just need to get your house in order. What is legitimate on your own network and
Absolutely.
what is not? It's always like that, as we like to say, that essential cyber hygiene is just so critical.
Yeah.
And, I love that you were saying something like that, because more and more, as attacks do get more sophisticated, and not necessarily super tricky or super elaborate, but sophisticated in the fact that they know how to avoid detection by tools in our tool stack. Then it's kind of, how do you defend? Oh, back to the basics.
Exactly, right.
What's on my network? What's allowed? What's not allowed?
Exactly, right. I think this also sort of just want to touch upon sort of a prior incident that we responded to, right? In that case, it was a 48 vulnerability that they exploited, right? The bad guys got access. But from a sequence of events, right? They started off with, once they got access, they started off doing reconnaissance. So that is running port scans and looking for Kerberos, sting vulnerabilities, and so on, and trying to do man in the middle. All of those are opportunities for detection that don't require your EDR to work, right? As long as you have that visibility from your network, logs from your domain controller or your servers, you still have the ability to detect those things, right? And so you don't have to necessarily detect malicious tools. You can kind of sort of try to start to detect things early in the attack lifecycle if you have that full enterprise visibility.
Right.
And that's what we stress.
Right. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You can't talk about cybersecurity without talking about AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so, in a recent interview you had on stage at an MSP conference, you said around 15 years ago, machine learning didn't impress you, but now LLMs definitely, are more of a presence and perhaps more impactful. So what specifically do you believe changed in the last couple of years that finally made AI useful and impactful for MSP security teams?
Yeah, and I'll first start off with sort of describing why I was not impressed, right? I'd say for the most part where ML was used, for a long time in our industry was via in SIM, right, in your log management tool. And the reason why I was not too impressed is that a lot of the times the ML models that they would deploy would require them to have visibility. So actually stepping back a second, right? So for SIMs, until some time back, right, the primary data that they had access to were firewall logs, right? Either firewall logs, DNS logs, or logs from your critical servers, right? They didn't have that full visibility. And so given that, I can see why they would deploy ML models to find bad stuff, is because they didn't have the right visibility to understanding what the bad guys were doing, right? If all they had were logs from your firewall, you needed the ML models to figuring out if something bad was going on, right? Because you didn't know what was happening on the endpoints. And so I can see why they try to leverage ML models. And we did that as well, right? So we had clients that would say, for compliance reasons, I want you to ingest just the firewall logs and just these 10 critical servers because I need to pass compliance. But what they lacked was that full visibility across the board, right? And so when we had limited visibility, an ML model was required in order to detect something bad. Oftentimes with that came along a lot of false positives, right? Because your ML models are only so good. And so that still required us to actually figure out I see something bad happening. Now, how do I validate that? For me to be able to validate that, I need an agent on the endpoint that I see this model flag. And so without that agent, I cannot tell you if it is bad or good, right? And so for me, what was more important and critical was having that visibility. And so for me, that trumped the latest ML models, because without that visibility, you're kind of trying to solve a problem that you didn't have full visibility against, right? Now, kind of moving past that, what I've seen change, especially in the last year, is not so much the ML associated with consuming large amounts of data and making sense of it. What has changed is how, including companies like ours, have been able to take in the visibility that we do have and make sense of, and basically scaling up our investigations, right? So just to give you some concrete examples, right? We, and even with sort of the recent incident, the runtime environment, right? While the bad guys did install Dino, which is a known tool, they still leveraged Dino to run a compiled JavaScript code, right? That was obfuscated. Now, for us to be able to take that obfuscation and make sense of it, would have required a reverse engineer with some level of experience with JavaScript, probably a couple of hours to understanding what may have happened, right? I was able to take that compiled code, run it through an LLM, and get all of the IOCs and everything deobfuscated in seconds. So I think that has changed the ability to take in this really obfuscated code that required someone with the expertise to be able to, like an L3 analyst, to be able to decode, is now you're essentially automating, right? That has come a long way, and for me, that is one reason why I'd say LLMs make sense. right? Another place where I've seen it be really effective is even though we have that visibility and we understand what the bad guys are doing, for us to take that information and kind of create like a remediation workflow on the fly has kind of changed the game for us, right? You're able to pass all of those indicators and the attack to an LLM and say, come up with a workflow that lets me automatically remediate. And it's able to kind of, in a guardrail manner, still provide us that remediation workflow, right? All of those, I think, have really changed the game a bit, right? Automated summaries, improvement in tickets, remediation workflows, how it is, its ability to analyze and obfuscated code. I'd say those are the things that kind of make a difference, right? And just recently, like another thing that we did was just last week, we deployed sort of the latest model for our phishing detection. And it's done a far better job of detecting malicious or phishing emails than anything I've seen in the past, right? So I think the context window issue is still there. So we cannot like send every log to an LLM for it to make sense. But once you're able to constrain that window, provide some filtered set of events, it's able to make sense of it and provide you some value add. I'd say for that reason, I think it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great insight. And what I liked what you say is like really, you made it within your workflow. So this is how we do business. This is how we can have AI, help us, maybe introduce efficiencies and do better analysis inside our workflow. So for MSPs, where do you see that MSPs are breaking this, or it's not working for them today in their tooling, in their process, in their expectations? Can you help us understand that so we can use it better?
Yeah, I think the tool has proven itself, right? The models are pretty good. I'd say where it sort of sometimes doesn't work is if you don't have your process defined, right? If you don't have clarity on the data that you have. And also, if you're kind of day-to-day basis, right? If you're kind of dealing with tool sprawl, if you're having to deal with multiple portals and trying to kind of put in AI and so that works across your different workflows, I think that's where it doesn't work. The models themselves are great, right? It's like, how do you make that work based on the data that you have access to, as well as the multitude of tools that you now have to call on to kind of have it do stuff, right? So I'd say, I think that's where it breaks, is MSPs not having a sort of clarity around their own processes, around the data that they have access to. I'd say less an issue with the tool itself, with the model itself, more sort of not having these defined workflows or defined processes and clarity on the data, right? If you're able to kind of figure out your basics, once you've done that, once you've kind of understood where your data is, what are the tools that you have in place, how do you consolidate that tools, then it's sort of an easier place to kind of bring on an automated workflow at that point.
Yeah, makes sense. Over to you, Wes.
What a fun conversation. So, Andrew, I saw that comment you popped in, and I'll just jump into this real quick. And Vijay, please add to this. But I think with not just the advent of what AI is starting to do among MSPs, I think a cyber call on really a bunch of things. One, are what actually are AI agents? How do they typically operate on the machine? What level of risk does that introduce? What capabilities do I have as an MSP to defend against those risks? And what questions should I be asking to my vendors and third parties deploying those agents? I think a cyber call on that would just be awesome, because I think so. Yeah. I mean, any thoughts on that, Vijay? Just to tease into it.
I mean, there's a lot there's a lot of efficiencies gained from having that level. But along with that, the risk of giving an agent access to your full, email and everything that you own is a problem, right? So having guardrails around this absolutely are required. I think how it is that you deploy the agents. So we have agents in-house as well, right? But for us, we think of an agent as a separate user. It's not an agent that you would use yourself. It is an agent that you would call on, right? So I think kind of translating that into how MSPs can deploy agents is something that I think, firstly, we're sort of right in the middle, right at the beginning of this, right? And so I think the industry is going to have to evolve around how these agents are deployed. And I think there's not much clarity, even from the model developers themselves, right? Claude and Gemini, they make things available to you, but how do you make that sort of in a manner that works, that's constrained, right? And I think, yeah, you're right. I think a whole separate cyber call around it is absolutely required. I'm starting to see sort of people just deploy agents just based on Twitter feeds and so on, right? There's a lot of risk associated with that. And how do you deploy that in a manner that works is something that we'll want to work around. Right?
Go ahead, Phyllis.
No, I was gonna say I think that's a great idea. I mean, I'd be interested as well. I mean, I think I told this story on the cyber call when Microsoft first released Copilot. I talked with someone there, and they're like, "Hey, here it is. Just play around with it." And the first question that everyone asked was, "How much money does my coworker make? How much money?"
Yep.
Does Wes make? How much money does Andrew make? And then it caused all sorts of issues. And Microsoft started getting a ton of complaints. And they're like, oh, we need to firewall off this data. Not everyone should have access to HR data because the initial instinct is you get everything. You're going to get the smartest, bestest answer, right? And then it was like, oops, you're not supposed to know how much your peers make or other people.
Yeah. No, I mean, I see the benefit of it, right? So I've used it myself, like some version of it, obviously not giving it full access, right? I'd have it make, presentations, right? I can say, you know what, I've deployed an extension, a Chrome extension. I think Claude has one. And that says, this is an example presentation. Can you create a presentation that does X, Y, and Z? And it's able to kind of go out and at least start to do it. You still have to tweak it. But like that efficiency gained I think is invaluable. The question is, how do you do it securely, right? And how does an MSP kind of bring that to the market to their employees? So this, definitely another topic for sure.
And to talk about just the future of we're starting to see a number of really great vendors come out that are doing some interesting things around like automation, like bot and agent-based automation. And so now we have this introduction of not just data privacy and data security and data sensitivity, but also operational activity on the endpoint.
Yep.
And that should be discussed. It's kind of like Eric mentioned way deeper in chat 20 minutes ago about it'd be nice if we had zero trust and some thoughts put around like the intent of what's happening. And this gets back into VJ, what you were talking about, right? Like why is an accountant downloading developer tools, right? Same thing of why is this agent doing these strange and odd things that just don't make sense based on the role, based on the use case, based on the activity, based on the inputs, whatever. And, those are things that I think are going to bite us if we're not talking about those ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, I definitely see that as a future, right? AI agents, are going to be a thing, right? Mainly because of the efficiencies gained from it. Like, I think the MSPs should be prepared for a world where vendors or their clients are going to want to deploy it. The question then is, okay, how do you enable the MSPs to do it in a manner that is secure, right? And just from a platform standpoint, for us, we want to make sure we're able to do that, right? Just to your mention of workflows, we'd want to make sure that MSPs are able to leverage kind of secure workflows within our platform and deploy that to their clients as well, right? And so that is something we're working on as well.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So I'd love to let's I want to shift gears back over to Write a Boom for a minute. Will you share with us a little bit about what your Rack to Shell presentation is going to be all about? And for MSPs that are coming, what are they going to take away from that session?
Yeah, so I'm really going to cover sort of the past, present, and future of threat hunting, right? So React to Shell is a specific use case. I'll probably include, the Dino issue as well. But it's really, where's the industry evolving, right? Just talking about sort of the history of it and sort of the tools available to them for them to be able to do it on their own, right? So that's really the main takeaway is, I'd say, twofold. One is understanding what the threat actors are doing, talking about those specific issues, right, related to them not only going after the 0 days, but also kind of chaining and going back in time to finding the vulnerabilities that have worked for them and trying to exploit that. But also, what is the future of threat hunting, right? It is, for me, it is giving access to the MSPs themselves to be able to do threat hunting in a manner that makes sense for them, right? And just to this whole Dino runtime environment, right? As a vendor, yes, that was an obvious use case where we knew it was an accountant that was downloading a developer runtime environment. But in the future, that visibility may not be available to us as a vendor, right? That knowledge may not be available to us. The MSP, however, has that knowledge, right? So given their insight, their access to their client, how do they benefit from sort of the future of threat hunting, right? And that's really what we want to kind of provide them.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That's going to be a great session. I'm super looking forward to it. It's I think it's necessary. Phyllis, you're up. Sorry, making you jump to the mute.
Sorry, my mute was still on. So, we did briefly go over the fact that you worked at Mandiant prior and was one of the founding members. So can you share what was it like to start such a huge organization now? And did you ever think that it would get to where it is and then be
absolutely
swallowed
not
by Google?
Yeah, no, definitely not, right? So when I started, I was like one of a handful of employees, right? Bunch of turnover within the first year. I was like after Kevin, I was number 2 in terms of tenure. And so it was sort of early on. There's a lot we had to do to kind of get things up and running, right? I think what really allowed us to scale up is the technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Kevin was, still is a visionary. He was a primary kind of driver of the company, but the vision he had in terms of scaling up the IR practice is really what led Mandiant to be where it is, right? Our ability to kind of be at the forefront of the most widely known IRs is really what kind of gave us that, basically allowed us to do what it is that they're still continuing to do for that matter.
Right.
So go ahead, Andrew.
I'm just going to ask you, Vijay, my understanding and my memory serves me incorrect. Didn't Mandiant create their own EDR? And if so, why? Like they had such a lead, BJ, like to the CrowdStrikes, the SentinelOnes. Like, granted, your big customers had it, but was there? Do you sit here and go, man?
Yeah,
I realized this, and
I think this was right around when people were still opposed to adopting stuff in the cloud. And so when we built out our tech, it was still an appliance that we would ship. Right. It was ship an appliance. If you're, JP Morgan, you'd ship 40 different appliances, running them at like different locations or whatever that was, right? And so CrowdStrike came along, they were like cloud first, right? SentinelOne came along, they're like cloud first, right? So I think that was sort of, I think we were maybe a year too early in kind of creating our architecture. If it started maybe a year later, we'd be like, let's do it in the cloud and start with that. And that would have kind of, taken us, places, right? And because we started with that all hardware first, let's create the hardware, there's a lot of delays in how, we were able to kind of do stuff, right? And I think we quickly realized that, yes, this approach to taking IOCs and scanning the enterprise for IOCs helps to a certain extent. But what was required was applying that intel to real-time telemetry, right? And it took us a little bit of time to kind of come up with that. And by the time we switched to, okay, now let's do this in real time, I think it was already a little late. CrowdStrike had come along. So it took us a little time to kind of pivot from on-prem assets, infrastructure-led EDR technology to a cloud-first technology. And I'd say that's where, right? I'm sure, if you speak to Kevin, he'll have some regret about it. But I would say I think that was the primary reason. And to your point, yes, we built the first EDR, and I still claim that I did that because I did do that. Right?
And Vijay, you make this great point that like market timing is one of those things that you just can't really predict. And I've seen that time and time again, where it really comes down to when you enter the market. There's a lot to say about that.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and even Stuart McClure and from Cylance,
yeah.
They even, had such a lead, VJ. I've said it on the cyber call before, but I, back in the day, I was, they were asking me about MSP and it was literally the time I met Wes in like 2016, 2015 area. And I'm like, it's got to be multi-tenanted. I'm like, you guys are onto something. They had such a lead. And it's just amazing what happened, right? They had such a huge, what they could have been, the market share. Do you remember, Wes? I know Corey Clark's on here. They used it early on, and man, it's really interesting seeing how it all played out.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know sort of what went on behind the scenes there, because they had a good tech. Right?
Yeah,
stack,
sure.
and it's surprising it didn't kind of didn't work out for them.
Yeah. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour here, VJ. This was awesome. I really, really appreciate you coming on. Wes, appreciate you
Anytime.
Today. It was awesome having you and sharing your perspective. Phyllis, always great to see you. Everybody out there as well. Thanks for on this cold, probably day for folks like Ann and I'm sure Mike at Relevant and others. Bob, I'm sure even with you, Miller, you're dealing with it in Louisiana. So take care. Oh, and in closing, So CyberCall will be off 2 weeks back to back because of Right of Boom. Wishing you all safety, warmth. I hope everything gets cleared quickly, and looking forward to seeing you all in a little over a week.
All voices, one place. There's a session for everyone on your team at Right of Boom 2026, MGM Las Vegas, February 3rd to 6th. Join us to connect, learn, and bring back insights that matter.